Could you just talk about, we're talking about violence on television, the different passions on many sides, about how to deal with that. Can you talk about what the Children's Television Act of 1990 was and how you felt about it?
Well, clearly those of us in children's television on the broadcast side and the syndication side were regarded as the bad guys, because the people behind that act, Peggy Charon and the group, were passionate in their belief that some of the things we were doing for children were harmful to children. So we were naturally adversarial. But there were components to the act that I personally was very supportive of. For example, one of the main things the act did was limit the amount of commercials in children's television, and I was all for that. And I was all for that even when I was running a broadcast company, the Fox Children's Network, because that was our revenue. But I liked the idea that we were restricted with the amount of commercials because I thought it was very interruptive. We learned a lot and did a lot of things back then that I thought were good solutions. For example, I wasn't convinced that children couldn't tell the difference between programming content and commercial content. But Peggy and the researchers had done a lot of work, and they felt that very young children did have the problem with distinguishing it. So we created what was called bumpers. And I was fine with that. I actually liked it aesthetically, creatively, because you would end an act and then you would have a bumper that showed something, benign, that was clearly meant to be a separator between programs and commercials. And it would say, we'll be right back after these commercials. And then at the other side, it would say, now back to our programming. So there were clear separators. Well, the reason I liked it aesthetically is, don't we all hate it when we're watching a program and it's either very funny or very dramatic, and all of a sudden, boom, you're into a commercial. It's like, what hit me? So I was favorable to that, and I thought, in case they're right, that they're very young children can't tell the difference, this is a good solution. And Peggy embraced this as a solution. So we had the industry and she developed a good working relationship. There were times I thought it went too far, but it didn't necessarily go too far by Action for Children's Television or the Act. It was the interpretation of our own broadcast standards. For example, when I was at NBC, we did an animated show called Planet of the Apes, based on the first movie and the books of equal fame. And I got a call from the producer to Patty Freeling, Friz Freeling Studio, his company, and they said, oh, we got a problem, Margaret, with your broadcast standards. They won't let us air the show. I said, what do you mean they won't let you air the show? They said, yes, your broadcast standards editor has said the music is too violent. What? What? So I got in my car, I drove over. My own broadcast standards person was there, who doesn't work for programming, he works for a separate division to keep it independent. And I watched the show, and the music was fantastic. Now, by the way, Patty Freeling had gone to London and used the London Symphony to score the series. It was a glorious score. So I said to Patty Freeling, what are we going to do? I don't want to change the music. I don't think you should change the music. They said, leave it to us. So they had the broadcast standards scheduled another screening for him to come in the next day, and I was there. I went in, they screened it the next day, and the broadcast standards editor said, okay, it's fine now. Thank you for making the changes. So he left, and I said to Patty and to Freeling, I said, what just happened? Because that was the same score. He says, yeah, but we use really little speakers. I said, you're kidding. He says, no, but it worked.
Wow.
So part of the problem was the way various broadcast, or part of the challenge was the way various broadcast standards editors interpreted all the rules about violence. There was nothing in the act that said that music could be deemed as violent. I mean, that's ridiculous. Right. But they interpreted it that way. So there was good and bad with the act. The limitation of commercial minutes, I was in favor of. The separation between commercial and program content, I was supportive of. Some of the crazier notions that happened, Hanna-Barbera had a show in production. I wasn't there at the time, I was at NBC. It was called C-Lab 2020. And that show was used, it was supposed to be an educational show, but they again were attacked for their music being too suspenseful and raising the anxiety of children. I thought that was ridiculous. So it was, so Peggy and I were often on opposite sides, but we learned over the years, we did respect each other. And I appreciated, and I say often today, sometimes I think we need a Peggy Charon because the bumpers have kind of gone away, and now you go right from commercials into programming, and I think it's a little disruptive, or some of the conscientiousness that we had to make sure we were making the right decisions I don't see today. It's kind of a wild, wild west now.
In addition to the sort of congressional oversight and the political oversight, what about from, you mentioned Hasbro was a great client at Hanna-Barbera for the G.I. Joe and the Transformers franchise.
At Marvel.
Oh, sorry, at Marvel.
That's all right.
Did they ever creatively try and input ideas into the storylines?
Oh, yes.
So how did you balance all of that?
Well, when we were doing G.I. Joe and Transformers originally at Marvel, the first series that started it all, I remember one day, they were very involved, but because they were funding it. So I remember one day, I had two writers show up in my office that were partners, and they were the story editors of Transformers. And they came marching into my office, and they said, we've had it. We've had it. We're done. I said, what? So here's what happened. Hasbro told them they had to write a script, write a Transformers script, but they couldn't tell them yet what characters would be in it because they haven't figured out which toys they're going to push. And the writers said, we can't write a script without knowing who the characters are. No, you could just write a generic script. That's when they came to my office, said, time out. So I got on the phone with Hasbro, and we worked through it, and we finally resolved who the characters would be, and I said to them, you've basically asked the impossible of the writers. You cannot write a script without knowing your core characters. You can't just fill in the blanks because there are attitudes and distinctive personalities, and it's not just all generic. So that was typical because they were wanting to push a certain toy. Having said that, one of the issues or concerns I had about the shows early on was that they were based on toys, even though it was perfectly legal because we were doing syndication, not network. But I did say to Hasbro, why don't we create these little messages at the end of each show that are very pro-social and very positive to give, not a veneer, but to balance it. And they were agreeable to that. So both in G.I. Joe and Transformers we had them, and they were very effective. We got more mail from kids about those than anything else. And the shows were very, very popular. So it is a balancing act because a toy company's job is to sell toys, and our job as producers is to make the best program possible. So oftentimes the Hasbro or any other toy companies were involved with other shows would come in and say, we want you to feature this play set. And we say, no. We can create a set that looks like that, but we're not going to call it a play set or duplicate because that's in violation of the rules of the Children's Television Act. So we were having to police. When you work in syndication, you have to be the policeman. There isn't a network to be the policeman. So we learned how to do that, and without alienating the client. That's what you learn to do.
I'm curious how much your own legal staff was involved, and also did you have, like, in the research department, child psychologists that were also involved? I mean, how did you
It's a good
that kind of
question.
input?
Well, at NBC, we did put together a board of advisors, and we had a noted pediatrician on it. We had a child psychologist. We had a law enforcement officer. We had a welfare worker. It was a very balanced. And we met with them frequently, and they were very, very informative. They really gave us the educated look and experience of what the impact is on kids. And we would take dilemmas to them and discuss how we resolved it. And sometimes they'd say, you did exactly the right thing. And sometimes they'd say, well, here's what would have been better. So it was learning. So when I went to Fox Kids, I created a similar board. And it was very helpful. And I did the same when I went to my last CEO job, which was for a company co-owned by Discovery and Hasbro. I also created a similar board to give us the same information. And actually, it's probably more important today because the Children's Television Act is not enforced to the extent that it used to be. It's still there and it's still enforced, and there are companies that have gotten fines for excessive commercials, but it's not top of mind. You know, when you're worried about world peace or terror or the economy, kids programming isn't front and center like it used to be. It's just not, it's not a hot topic like it was before.
Did some of the properties at Marvel, like Gem or My Little Pony, were those created at all with a female child audience in mind? Or
well, Gem definitely, yes, yeah. Gem and My Little Pony, you know, the toy company wanted to sell toys to little girls. And when we did Gem, that was created by Christy Marks. It was a great show. And Gem is interesting because what happened with Gem is the TV show that we did was very successful. The toy line wasn't. So we didn't do additional seasons. I think we did 65 episodes of Gem. Mm-hmm. And I still, to this day, have gotten letters from people saying, why didn't you do any more? I'm like, it's not me. The toy company couldn't sell, they were trying to compete with Barbie. And at the time, Hasbro was basically a boy toy company, and Pony was a huge success for them, so it sort of helped to balance their successes in the toy market. But yes, both those shows they identified a space in the market, mm-hmm. and then had us create programming, and they worked very much with us. So Gem was one of my favorite shows. It was very unique at the time.
Did you ever have to deal with censorship from the toy company, or just within your own standards and practices?
I never had to deal with censorship. It was the opposite. With the toy company, it was often put more toys in it, make it more look like the toy, and I was always, part of my career, in addition to talking people into things that they didn't think was going to work, but was also to fight the battle for the creative side. With Jim Henson, that was my main role, was to deal with the network on Muppet Babies, not only to be in charge of development, but to fight those battles if he wanted to do something or if he didn't want to do something. So oftentimes with toy companies, they want so much to sell the toys, which is their business. If they could animate a toy looking exactly like it does, they would do it. But that isn't always the best way to create a show.
Yeah.
So it's a rub, and the toy companies could often be annoyed with us. But I think at the end of the day, when we did good programming, they did appreciate that we were trying to do the best we could for a program that also represented a toy line. Mm. It's a constant give and take.
We kind of skipped ahead to X-Men, and we missed the part where you launched a network.
Ah, yes.
Can you talk about when you went over to Fox Kids, what the challenges were?
Oh.
To that, and who your competitors were, what you were trying to fill.
Yeah. Well, first let me set the stage in 1990. 1989 is when I got the offer. I was still at Marvel under contract. The three networks were very much dominating television, broadcasting on Saturday morning. But what had emerged was syndication. And Disney had Disney Afternoon, and Warner Brothers had a block of shows that they were doing in syndication. Tiny Toons was one of them. And the atmosphere was that the networks were king. That was the sentiment. And as a matter of fact, when I got the offer to do the Fox Kids, start the network, my friend Judy Price at CBS, who had been the one to identify Muppet Babies as a good idea for me to pursue, she said to me, "Margaret, you're going to ruin your career. Don't go to Fox. You can't do a fourth network." And to be fair to Judy, that was the sentiment of everybody. Everybody. I got calls from friends and colleagues who said, "Don't do it. You're at the top of your game. You've just won all these Emmys. You've got great stuff going on at Marvel. Don't do it. Don't do it." And you know, the more they said don't do it, the more I became intrigued with the opportunity, because Fox had a real vision, and that was a smart vision. Now, remind you, this is before the preponderance of cable. Cable was mainly reruns. So Fox's idea was they had all these independent stations that they had created, aggregated to be this network, and there were the stations. Many of them were strong in children's programs. They carried these syndicated blocks. So if they had a network, a fourth network for kids, and they aired it not only on Saturday mornings, which was an island of entertainment for kids, but also Monday mornings and Monday afternoons and through the week, afternoon and morning programming, we could basically outmuscle the three networks if we came up with good programming. The fact that we would be on 21 hours a week rather than 5 hours a week, we could be king. And this was very much Barry Diller and Jamie Kellner's business vision, and it was, I thought, very compelling. So I felt, I loved Marvel. I really had a good run, and I enjoyed Stan, and Marvel Comics was very supportive of me. But I hadn't been successful with their properties, and I felt like maybe if I went to Fox, I could do their properties. So I took the job thinking that, I really took the job because I was inspired by the vision of Kellner and Barry Diller and Jamie Kellner. I thought that they were onto something. And interestingly enough, years later, I felt, before anybody else, we were #1, and I was looking over my shoulder at cable, Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, because they were starting to develop original shows, and I thought, uh-oh, I outmuscled the three networks. I put on the right programming, but we had a bigger platform. They're going to outmuscle me, because they're kids 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was really nervous about that, which is why I urged my corporation, Rupert and Chase Carey, let's buy a cable channel. We better be in that business, and that's eventually what we did. But it was the perfect time to launch the fourth network in kids, and that helped our success.
How involved were you with scheduling the shows for
Totally.
which of those?
Totally.
And how did you
I
make
picked
those
the shows, I scheduled the shows, I was totally involved in every creative aspect, and I had a great team of program executives, many of whom had come out of production, which is what I wanted. One thing I learned over the years is that the reason why the producers were sometimes impatient or even hostile to the network executives, because the network executives didn't have any background in production. They'd never written, they'd never developed, they'd never cut film, they'd never done anything like that. They were suits. They were suits.
Yep.
And I witnessed that, and I thought, I don't want to be one of them. And my whole background had been learning on the job, so I was like a sponge. So anyway, I did predict that cable would eventually get us. And I was gone from Fox before it did. We were still #1 when I left. But it was just a matter of time.
So you were often blocking time versus what they were doing
Yeah.
in those time slots?
Well, the other dynamic that emerged at Fox is that Fox was really becoming a mature grown-up in the broadcast business in prime time. And they were originally founded on using a lot of independent, even VHS stations, not just UHF stations. And as they developed and they became more mature and more savvy and more successful, they needed to bring in stronger stations. So they went after bigger stations in big markets, New Orleans, San Francisco, St. Louis. Some of those stations, the New World stations as we referred to them because they were originally owned by New World, were very heavy in news. And that was the death knell of Fox Kids. Because over time, the affiliates were less and less inclined to carry the afternoon kids block, Monday through Friday, because they didn't think it was a good introduction to their 6 o'clock news, which was their bread and butter. So that's why Fox Kids isn't there. There's only one manifestation of Fox Kids today, and that's the Disney XD, which is Fox Kids Europe, because I also launched it overseas. And that was, when it was purchased, that remained intact, but they renamed it Disney XD. But otherwise, Fox Kids is gone because the stations themselves, a network is only as good as the composite of its stations. And when the stations' support waned, even though they were profitable with Fox Kids, they were partners in Fox Kids. They benefited financially from Fox Kids directly because they'd get a check from us. But we couldn't compete with news being the real bread and butter of these stations.
What are the aspects of being an executive in television that you enjoy?
Well, I enjoy developing shows. I enjoy scheduling shows, but most of all, I enjoy picking the shows. You know, when I was a producer, and I think half my career I've been a producer, I enjoyed making the shows. Developing and making the shows was very rewarding to me. But I hated selling them. I hated going out and having to sell shows. And I hated the responsibility of knowing if I didn't do a good pitch, I wasn't going to have shows coming in and money for the crew. I mean, we were only as good as the shows we sold. Stan was a great salesman, although not good enough for Marvel shows. But I did not like the pitch process. And so it's fair to say I would rather make the shows than buy the shows. But I'd rather buy the shows than have to sell the shows. So the most fun about being a network executive is to have the authority, the power to make something happen. You know, when you're a producer, you can't always make it happen. You're pitching and pitching and pitching until someone maybe stands up and believes in you and supports you. But there's so many great ideas that go by the wayside because a network executive doesn't believe in it. When you're a network executive, you can say, I believe in it, let's do it. That's fun. That's exhilarating.
Other than finally getting to do everything you wanted with Stan at Fox Kids, what was your overall vision for the network when it was founded?
For Fox Kids? That we'd be on 7 days a week, which never happened. And the reason why that didn't happen at Fox was because I didn't, let me step back a minute and say one of the most important things for a network or any executive in our business today, or at any time, was to understand the business. I came up through the creative and production ranks, and it took me a long time to learn the business. But it's vital to know the business. So if I had known the business when I started Fox, I would have realized that getting Sunday morning from the affiliates was probably impossible because they made so much money off of church and religious programs or their syndicated blocks that they'd have on Sunday morning. it didn't make sense financially. And when we were #1 in writing big checks to the affiliates, when I got the first check from Saban for all the merchandise that was sold to Marvel, and we gave all those big checks to the stations, and they were on top of the world, they still weren't interested in Sunday morning because that was a big profit center to them. So part of my vision was to be on 7 days a week because I thought we were unfinished yet. We had to be on every day. I also, part of my endeavor at Fox was to not only make us #1, but make us the best. I wanted lots of awards, not for me, because I always felt that getting awards was synonymous with being known for quality. And I felt that being known for quality would help solidify our future. And it's also very aspirational. You always want to do better, do your best. And I felt that that would pay back. It wasn't to be because of these other political issues, not political, but strategic, corporate strategic issues that I wasn't familiar with until I was there. Mm. So my vision was that Fox Kids could become a Nickelodeon in broadcast. I never realized how much trouble, how challenging it would be. And I should have known, because when Jamie Kellner offered me the job and I met Rupert Murdoch and they described my responsibility, they described how their 200 affiliated stations were our partners, and there was an affiliate board that I would work with and for. I said to them, well, wait a minute, who do I work for? Never forget this. They said, well, you work for us, but you make the 200 stations think that you work for them. And I said, okay. And I did that, but as you can see, it wasn't a perfect setup, because eventually what was important for the stations would outweigh what I wanted. If they didn't want Sunday morning programming, if they didn't want afternoon programming because it wasn't good for their news, they were going to win.
Right. Are there other surprising challenges and obstacles you face like that?
Well, I was always surprised, and this is maybe an ego thing, but I'll bet you every successful producer in town will say the same thing. I was constantly amazed at how much I had to fight for every time, no matter what the hit was that I had on the air. Everything was a fight. Everything you believed in was a fight. Maybe I was naive, but that, and I was prepared to fight, but you know, that does become wearying. But that's the name of the game. You are really only as good as your last hit. And it's next. What have you got for us today? Mm-hmm. So if you don't have resilience in our business and tenacity, no matter how talented you are, you can't succeed. I'm a very tenacious person. And had I not been, I wouldn't have had the successes I had, because no matter how many times you're knocked down, you get up again and you get back in it. And that's what I tell young people today. I said, there are two things you have to have: curiosity and tenacity. And if you have those, you can do just really fine.
Mm-hmm. Also, you seem to have had a unique management style in how you work with creators and the business side of things. I mean, how would you describe your relationship that way with your style?
Well, I mentioned earlier that my father was an Air Force general, and he was a remarkable man, because we all have, or many people have, a stereotypical view of what an Air Force general or any general might be. But my father was quite remarkable. He was a real gentleman. People loved working for him. He was gentle. I never in my life, other than damn it, ever heard a foul word come out of his mouth. He rarely ever lost his temper. I think the worst thing you could call someone was a jerk, and then I know it's really bad. But he had 40,000 people working for him, and they loved him. And what I witnessed is that he treated them with respect. And that's how he raised me. And he always felt that if you, the golden rule, I mean, it was hammered into me as a kid, treat people the way you want to be treated. So I think my management style reflects that. I generally like most people, so that helps. And I'm very enthused to support people that are really talented. It's fun to be able to help them. I've always felt that my talent was being able to elevate talented people and fight for them. I mean, Jim Henson was a very talented man, but he was not combative. He didn't want to fight the fights. He had people do that, and I was one of them. So if you have a pleasant management style, I don't think anyone's thought I was a sap, because I believe in what I believe. And I'll listen, but if I don't like it, you can't make me do something I don't like or don't believe in. But you can sway me if your belief is strong enough. So I think it's just treating people with respect would be my management style, but also having a pretty strong instinct for what we ought to be doing, or I have some clarity about what we ought to be doing. That helps.
You've said you didn't really notice, any sort of gender imbalance for yourself personally in the industry, but do you think overall, female executives in the industry, that the path has changed?
Well, I wouldn't say I didn't see it personally. I did see it personally. I didn't make it an issue. Of course, I felt that there were times in my career where, had I been a man, I would have been treated a little differently or been given more each of the times I really believed in something and I didn't get support for it, I felt that there were times when my counterparts who were men in other areas of programming, if they were really passionate about something, their bosses would let them do it. But with me, I was always being second-guessed. I was always having to prove. I'd have to fight for something. I mean, on numerous occasions in my career, I had to agree, okay, you can fire me if this doesn't work. It got to that point. I don't think many men, I didn't ever hear of many men that happening to. But having said that, I was also given great opportunities, and I was a woman, so I just tried not to make it an issue. And there was areas of sexual harassment that I confronted coming up when I was younger, but the way we dealt with that back then was to laugh it off, was to deal with it. We just, make a joke or whatever, but you didn't run to human resources and complain, because you knew that meant you'd be out. It's a different world. But I think we've all grown up a bit in the business, and our business has grown up, and there's such now diversity, and there's such a focus on diversity that even if it exists, the differences, it's not as bad as it was.
Did you ever make that an active priority in terms of who you hired?
Yes.
You did?
Yes. Probably my own prejudice, but one of the things I learned in my career is that women often, not always, often make really good executives and managers because they're very detail-oriented, whereas men are often more big-picture oriented. So I would be cognizant of that when I was hiring people, men for certain jobs. And, there are obviously exceptions to that. And there are some men that are very good with details, but a lot of men don't like the details. They'd rather deal with the big picture. So I would think of that when I was hiring people.
Mm-hmm. How do you think the definition of family entertainment has changed?
Well, I've been trying to change the definition of family entertainment for 30 years because we developed and launched the Hallmark Channel, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It was another one of my favorite jobs, and it was a real change for me to now be dealing with a different kind of programming. But I remember an experience when I was working for Jim Henson Television. I was president of Jim Henson Television, and after Jim had gone, and I worked for his son and for Charlie Rivkin, who became our ambassador to France. But they were fun to work for, and they came to me. I was going to take a job at Warner Brothers after Fox. I was going to go to Warner Animation and run that. And I'd always wanted to work for Warner Brothers. And then one day there was a knock at my front door, and it was Brian Henson and Charlie Rivkin, Brian being Jim's oldest son. And they basically said, "We love you, and we want you to come to Jim Henson Company." So I did. I only was there for a year because what happened is they also said to me, "We want to be in the distribution business. We're tired of not being able to sell shows that we want to sell." So we found that we've created a joint venture, a partnership with Hallmark, and we're going to launch a channel. So I moved over and we purchased the Odyssey channel, which was a faith and values channel. And then my job was to convert it. And we did convert it to a Henson Hallmark channel, and then later rebranded it the Hallmark channel. It was a great experience. But the first thing I did is I went to Blockbuster. You have to think of when this was, in the 90s. Blockbuster was king of the hill, and I went in to look at what family programming was. And they had a section, family programming. And I went over, it was all animation. I said, "This isn't family programming." I grew up with family programming. Sea Hunt, all the adventure shows that were on in prime time, Flipper, those are family programs. It's not all animation. It's not dumbed down, which, I always gave kids credit where due. I didn't try to dumb down our programs. We tried to elevate them, even to the extent that we'd put vocabulary into shows that would make kids go see what it meant. Anyway, to me, family programming is a show that you and I enjoy as much as our kids. So it has to be appealing intellectually to adults, but appropriate to watch with your kids. That's family programming, targeted to us, but appropriate for kids. A lot of what was at Blockbuster under family programming was fine for kids, but it wasn't going to entertain us. And that was the big surprise to me.
What's a good example of a show that does that successfully?
The Middle. There are a lot of shows. Simpsons. When Simpsons first came on, people were horrified. I thought it was fantastic. I tried to get it for Fox Kids, but that was a joke. And then later on, when I was at the Hub working for Discovery and Henson, I tried again when they brought it out in syndication, and they came and pitched it to us, and it was so beyond our reach financially. It was so expensive. But I thought it was a great kids show, and it was a great family show because it really dealt with a lot of issues. And underneath all the jokes, one thing that's conveyed is that family. Homer Simpson loves his family. He's nuts and sometimes a jerk, but he loves his family. So that was a good example of an animated family show. And then there have been a lot of comedies, in particular. I can't think of the name of it. It's won several Emmys. With Sophia.
Modern Family.
Modern Family. That's a great family show. That's another example of a good family show. So now when we were at Hallmark, we had a more targeted goal, and that was for women, because that was consistent with the Hallmark brand. But still, I'm very proud of the Hallmark Channel today. Bill Abbott is CEO, and I hired him as head of sales. He did a great job. And he's following the template we set up for movies and going after women and trying to be positive with positive role models. But anyway, family is still an emerging, the definition is emerging, and people are really starting to focus on it. But quite frankly, coming up in the industry, family programming was just sort of it kind of went away. So, but there is a need for it, and there is a desire for it. And there are programmings that fit the bill, but they're not whole networks focused on it anymore.
What was the Hub? And what was the programming that you wanted to achieve at the Hub?
Well, the Hub was really the brainchild of Brian Goldner, who's the CEO of Hasbro. And Brian is, I've known Brian since Brian we hired as a consultant when I was at Fox to help us with Power Rangers. He was with a major advertising agency. So Brian is now CEO of Hasbro and doing an amazing job. Brian had a vision for having a distribution outlet to represent his shows, not exclusively. And he went to Discovery. Discovery Kids was struggling. They really hadn't, I think they'd done a good job with Discovery Kids from a branding perspective, but they didn't really have, it was an oddity of all the Discovery channels were reality programming primarily, non-scripted. So Brian got the idea. He was looking for a channel to buy or to create a joint venture. So he went to Discovery, and they came up with the idea of doing a joint venture, and they made a business deal. And after they made the deal, then they started looking for a CEO. And Brian called me one day and asked me why I didn't put my hat in the ring. I was running my own company.
Was that the hatchery?
The hatchery. And I said, I don't know. You think I ought to put my hat in the ring? He says, yes, put your hat in the ring. What's the matter with you? So I did, and got the job. And it was a great gig. I enjoyed it. We did a great job on some of our shows. The new My Little Pony show was fabulous. Transformers looked great. The shows we did were really good shows. But Brian and I both felt that we had the opportunity to do maybe another Power Rangers. Maybe something we did would blow the socks off the kids, like Transformers. They did a beautiful job in producing Transformers. But something had changed that neither of us early on recognized. We did, after we got into it, we recognized it. 8- and 9-year-old boys no longer buy action figures. They play video games. So the audience for those shows that would buy the toys has gotten much younger. Little girls there's some changes there too, but My Little Pony still worked because of the way it was written, and wonderful story editor did a lot of work on it, and her vision really shone through. But I don't think Brian and I initially recognized how much that had changed, and that we weren't going to do another Power Rangers. It just wasn't in the cards because of the way the boys had changed. I mean, the boy habits had changed. So it was a lot of, I had a great experience. They were wonderful to me. It was challenging. It was challenging for all of us. It was challenging for Discovery. It was challenging for Brian and Hasbro. It was challenging for me. So it was an interesting experiment. We did some things that I'm very proud of. We had some very successful shows. And when I left, we were profitable and our ratings were up.
Why did you leave?
My contract was up, and at that point, both Hasbro and Discovery had come to the conclusion that maybe it should be a Discovery company, more of a Discovery Channel. And so they worked out a deal that the daytime, there's still a daytime block of Hasbro, but the evenings are devoted to broader programming where Discovery could put on other shows, not just animation or not just kids shows. And it's now Discovery Family. I was supportive of that idea of having family. We were developing family programming for prime time. But it was a good gig. I was there 5 years, but it just, when my contract was up, everything had changed. Yeah. And it was time for me to move on.
I want to talk about the Television Academy Foundation now.
Yes.
You've been involved for a long time. Can you talk about when you first became involved and why?
Wow. I first became involved when John Mitchell had his first term as president. When would that be? When would that be?
That is a great question.
Dinah Shore became one of our governors a couple years later. We were meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Yeah, 20 some years ago?
Oh,
30?
Easy, 30, I think 30 years ago. I became involved because I was elected as a governor for children's programs, and I did all the terms I could do. And I really enjoyed it. At one point, I was elected treasurer of the TV Academy, and I did that for about 6 months. And then I said, I can't do this anymore because I had just had a baby, and it was just too much. I was running Marvel at the time, and then later I got the opportunity to join the foundation, which I really liked. The stated goals of the foundation, that was to be the educational arm for the company and to really have outreach, and I really enjoyed that. I had become, at Fox Kids, I think was the first, I had started hosting interns, and that's when I really got more involved, more interested in the academy through the eyes of the interns, because we mentored so many kids coming through. Fox Kids was a host for interns every single year that we were in existence. And I really saw the impact it had on those kids and how they were our future. So, and the academy itself has really become even more sophisticated and a well-oiled machine. And I've enjoyed moving over to the foundation because it's more specific to what I'm interested in, and that's mentoring and educating.
What do you think it does best?
Well, I think the intern program is probably the best internship that I've ever known in any industry. I think it's a wonderful program. I've always loved the interviews, which were called the archives, because I've worked for those people who are no longer with us. And to have them chronicled and to have their essence, as much as you can get on tape and on film for future generations, I think is fantastic. So I've always liked that program. I think that the celebratory aspects, we used to have something called the Hall of Fame, which was really a nice event. Now you have other things. So I love the idea of bringing the talent together and celebrating them and using them to educate young people about what it used to be like, because that just informs you of how it could be in the future. So I think that, there have just been some terrific outreach programs I love the visiting professors, having that, and I've challenged myself to come up with thoughts about how you could expand on that. But what I particularly enjoy is the idea that you can't learn about our business in a classroom in Indiana unless you've had the experience of knowing and listening to someone who's been in the business. And that's what a lot of the foundation can provide through the various programs, is that it's a real world education. It's not just ivory tower. That's what I like about what we're doing.
And your current role is vice chairman of the Board of Trustees, and you've recently been named the chair of the interviews committee.
Correct.
What do you hope to see in the future coming out of these programs?
Well, first of all, Madeline Denono is a firecracker, and she's worked for me at Fox, and she worked for me at Hallmark. So I know her tireless energy and intellect, keen intellect. So I know that Madeline's going to come in with a lot of ideas and both guns blazing to do new and different things. In the meantime, what I like about chairing the interviews committee is that we've got this unbelievable arsenal of information that is unequaled. The amount of experience that's captured in your archives is amazing. How do we more effectively spread the word? How do we use it? How do we use it as a tool to teach young people and to inspire people, not just to teach them? I didn't know anything about this business when I started, but I got inspired by a lot of the people I met, you know, whether it was Bill and Joe or Stan Lee or Friz Freeling or Walter Lantz. All those people were inspiring because they knew so much, they'd been through so much, and they were so humble, and they were eager to share it if you asked. That's what I think is exciting about this program, because we can use it as a tool, and it's just finding more ways to reach people and to make a difference in their lives and to excite them about the industry. And not just the obvious parts of the industry, the above the line, but the below the line. You know, I started in below the line in the film department at ABC, and I'm so happy I did, because I have an appreciation for what editors do and what the people who make it all happen, what they do. And we can really interest people if they know about it. So that's what I hope we can do, is spread the word.
Is there something you could think of that a piece of information or a piece of advice you wish you had known when you were starting?
Yes. I wish I had known something that many people today know, because they teach it, and nobody taught me this. And that is the necessity of networking. Nobody taught me that. I didn't have time, I was busy, I was learning, I was insecure, I didn't know anything, so I was just a sponge asking questions. But I have met so many interesting people along the way, wonderful people, but I haven't kept up with all of them. And that's my fault. Younger people today, especially the interns, they know about networking because your intern program teaches it. Mm-hmm. But I wish I'd had a consciousness about that, because I would have made a point to nurture the many, many relationships I've had along the way. I've nurtured some of them, but not many of them. I just didn't think about it because I was busy.
Right.
But networking is everything, because when you can pick up the phone and call a friend to help solve a problem or to help them, that's what makes things happen. Right. And I wasted a lot of opportunities not doing that.
But I mean, the story about Stan Lee and having nurtured that from the beginning.
Yes, and Stan is one of the people, and there have been people that I've stayed in touch with and nurtured, but there are many people along the way who were helpful to me, and I haven't necessarily kept up the relationship, and I've always felt bad about it because I remember them. I remember every one of them. But I didn't work at staying in touch. And I think it is so important, the concept of networking, as it is as important as any other aspect of the work you're doing, because those people will be of help to you, and you will be of help to them in the future. And that's not to be diminished. It's very important. And you know who knows that more than a lot of women? Men. A lot of male executives I noticed coming up the ladder were very good at that, and women weren't, because we were so busy trying to prove we were good enough. We were so busy trying to do our job perfectly so that we were worthy. That's how we felt. So we didn't spend a lot of time on that aspect. And I remember years ago I was having breakfast with Mike Ovitz, lovely man who died recently. And we were having breakfast, and he was talking about someone in our business. And he says, "Oh yeah, I see him every week, we play poker." So, "You play poker with so-and-so?" "Oh yeah, we get together every week, a whole group of us, and we play poker." Networking. That was just astonishing to me. And by the way, they were all competitors that got together. Right. But they, you know, they made a point of it. That's my point. They made a point of it.
And you never know when you're going to run back into someone again.
You always run into somebody.
We can't fail to mention we're sitting in the Chaim Saban Media Center.
Yes, we are, and Chaim has done great. And I was so touched that at the premiere of his movie recently, the most recent Power Rangers movie, he thanked me and stood up. And because oftentimes you do feel that people forget not me personally, but you always hope that someone remembers your contribution, and Chaim does. And You know, he's done very well. He's a very smart man. He was always very smart. And look, as I recall, as I said, to pay for that half of that pilot at Fox, he mortgaged his house. Mm. That's what I remember.
Yeah. Well, we'll ask him.
So it's gutsy,
yeah.
you know. And yes, we are in the Saban Center, and it's beautiful, and it is a small world.
I believe you're currently serving as executive chairman and advisor to Genius Brands.
Yes.
And their motto is content with a purpose.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
It really means that they're trying to find programming that is entertaining first and foremost, but there is a value, an educational or pro-social value to the show, that it has a real purpose to teach something. And I really like that. And I've known Andy Hayward, who's the chairman of the company, for years. And we've had a very dynamic relationship. I mean, I've said to Andy, I'm not accepting these scripts, do them over. Our first big success together was Carmen Sandiego, which I probably drove him nuts about getting the quality right, but he won an Emmy for it. And so when they approached me, I said, no, I'm not really interested in running anything anymore. And they said, well, you don't have to run it. You just really serve as a counsel and advisor to the staff that we have building our channels. And I'm very happy about that. We have some exciting announcements coming out soon. So I'm happy I've been able to participate and help with that. And it's not a full-time gig. They have a very good staff. Oh, it's great for me.
What's been your proudest career achievement?
I think, wow, there's not just one.
You can list multiple.
Yeah. I think my proudest career achievement has been to have worked with some great people and to have delivered on their vision and their talents, to have been able to do shows with them that they were proud of. You know, there's nothing more exhilarating than to hear Jim Henson say, you did a great job, this is what I hoped it would be. What's better than that? I think that, and the other achievement is, and it's been kind of overwhelming and almost a surprise, and that is to have grown-ups today who were kids in the 80s and 90s just send me these letters and, you know, over the internet, contact me and Facebook and tell me what the shows meant to them. And then probably the most consistent thing I've heard, and as a matter of fact, I had an incident just last week. You know, I have a home on the Gulf Coast. It was my family home growing up when we weren't being transferred all over. And a young man, African American, came to install a new security system. And he asked me, I can't remember what it was, but he asked me what I had done because he saw some pictures on the wall. I said, well, I'd been in animation. I hadn't said much more. I was in kids programming and family programming. And so the next day when they came back, he and his girlfriend, the three of them came back with the girlfriend, and he said, we Googled you. And he said, you are my hero. I said, what? He said, you, and I've heard this is the line I've heard from so many, particularly young men, but not exclusively young men. You made my childhood. I couldn't wait to get home from school and turn on the TV and watch, whether it was Fox Kids or Marvel, whatever it was. You made my childhood. And then they would talk about what these shows meant to them and how excited they were and how inspiring they were. I mean, that's, wow. You can't get better than that. And I never expected that. I really didn't. You know, when we were doing all this over the years, we did the best we could. We hoped we were having a positive impact on kids. We hoped we were entertaining them. We hoped we were teaching them good things. But we didn't really know for sure. We were just looking at ratings. So to hear it, today, and to continue hearing it as recently as last week is just, it doesn't get any better than that. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel good. And when they tell me what made a difference in their lives, it's so gratifying, because it's all those little things that we put in there that we thought to put in because we thought they were important, and they were. We didn't really know for sure. We're just going by our best instincts and common sense and remembering what we liked as kids.
Which shows get cited to you the most?
Well, wow, the most. Muppet Babies, Smurfs, Power Rangers, Batman, X-Men, Animaniacs. Those shows get the most. But there are other shows. Howie Mandel did Bobby's World with me. I got a lot of comments. Life with Louie Anderson, who ought to be in our archives.
Please.
Yes, I could help there.
Oh, good.
Louie is a very unique voice. He had a unique youth, and his show that we did, Life with Louie, which won 2 Emmys. What that really was the family he wished he had had, the father he had wished he had been, because he did have a very difficult childhood. It was just wonderful, very inspiring. But I get comments on those shows. I mean, it's never the same, but those are the top line shows, the ones I just mentioned.
I mean, I'm sure they're like children, but if you picked one that was your favorite that you just still get goosebumps thinking about, other than Goosebumps.
Goosebumps, I get, yeah, Goosebumps was good too. A lot of criticism when that started.
Yeah.
My bosses at Fox, though, by then, they stopped challenging me, but there was worry about how scary it would be. But kids love to be scared. You know, it's a safe. Yeah. They're watching from their living room or bedroom, wherever.
Is there one, though, of those shows that you get approached about that you really identify with still?
Wow. Well, certainly Smurfs and Muppet Babies, but I also think X-Men was a personal, I mean, X-Men I really went to the mat on. I even went to Fox Features and said, you've got to put this in development. You've got to put this in development. This and Spider-Man. And they put both in development, but eventually they gave up Spider-Man. It went to Paramount. I can't remember the reasons, but they kept X-Men. And both is history. I mean, I felt that they should be big theatricals. X-Men was such a labor of love because it was such a long journey, whereas Power Rangers was only a couple of years, but X-Men, the whole time I was at Marvel, and the first couple of years at Fox, I'd wanted to do that. And even at Hanna-Barbera, I'd wanted to do it in the 70s, but 70s and 80s, but we couldn't sell it, so.
What's the legacy of X-Men, the TV show?
Well, our animated series was the beginnings of everything for X-Men. There wouldn't have been a movie until we did the series. The series was successful, so I was able to interest the feature division. They embraced it. We even put X-Men on, their animated series, on in primetime in Fox as a test, and they got the audience they wanted. So the feature people were interested when I pitched it to them, and I wasn't involved with the movie, but it all started with the series. And look at all the movies that have been, although I did see Logan, this is off the record.
Okay.
I saw Logan last week. I've never heard so many 4-letter words from an X-Men. I couldn't believe the amount of, I'm like, what? So, but anyway, it was a good movie, but it was tough. Anyway, they all mean something to me. Muppet Babies was also very gratifying, and Smurfs. All the shows I had to fight for are the ones that mean the most to me because, you know, let's face it, it's wonderful to be right. And we're not always right. I'm not always right. I've fought for things that haven't worked. But when you're right, and you're right at big time, it's exhilarating. It's like, oh, I'm right. My brain's not crazy. I'm not crazy. And look, to be fair, there were great talents working on each of those shows. So I was lucky because I could have made bad shows, or they could have made bad shows, but they didn't. So I would say working with Jim Henson was a highlight of my career, but all those people, Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera and Friz Freleng and Tex Avery, I worked with Tex Avery and Hanna-Barbera. It was a gift. You know, Tex was a wonderful man. It was towards the end of his life when he worked with us, and it was a treat. Walter Lantz, all those people that made my childhood special, because when I went to the movies and saw those animated shorts, we were all enraptured. Kids and adults loved. We would actually go to the movies for the shorts. They were more important to us than the movies because they were always good. The movies weren't always good. So.
What about any career regrets?
I regret leaving Fox when I did. It wasn't all my decision, but I would have liked to have finished the work I'd started overseas. But on the other hand, I didn't have to experience the demise of Fox because of what was happening with the stations. But and I would have liked to have stayed at Hallmark longer, looking back. I really enjoyed the Hallmark Channel. It was a different, it was the same principles of trying to do the right thing and find programming that your audience would find inspiring. But it was a step away from animation and kids shows, but it was refreshing. It was fun. I've never apologized for doing the kids shows. I always enjoyed them. But this was it was a new adventure, and it was a new area I had to learn. And I'm sorry, I also left at the end of my contract and went and started my own company, but it would have been nice to have stayed a bit longer. I would have enjoyed that. I don't have too many career regrets, and actually, you know, when I was telling you earlier that I left left NBC because I felt my boss didn't like me. Years later, by the way, when he came in to pitch me a show, my boss, former boss, he was perfectly charming to me, and so I don't know if I was just overly sensitive or what, but I sure got the notion he didn't care for me. But at the time I left NBC, I had another job offer from CBS to go into comedy development for primetime as a junior programmer. And I chose Hanna-Barbera over that. And it was a career-changing move because I made the decision that I might have more fun being a big fish in a small pond than going over and being a little fish in a big pond. I don't know if that was my own insecurity, but I liked the people in the kids' programming. You know, I liked the Barberas and the Friz Freleng. So I liked all those people. There was another very prolific producer in kids programming named Bill D'Angelo, and he'd done a lot of live action shows for us. So we had some really interesting experiences, but that was not a decision I regretted. A lot of people advised me otherwise. They said, you've been in children's programs at NBC, use that as a springboard to get into prime time. Don't go to Hanna-Barbera. But I have no regrets about that because I worked with wonderful people.
Yeah. Well, I know you didn't get advice about networking, but what is a piece of advice, a good piece of advice that you received about working in television from anyone?
Wow. Well, I received a piece of advice when I took over Marvel. I've had lots of advice over the years, but the one that stands out was from the lawyer at Marvel Comics named Joe Calamari. I always loved his name, Joe Squid. Joe Calamari. And I shared with him, I said, oh my God, I'm becoming president, CEO of this company. What to do, what to do? And he said, listen, Margaret, everybody knows your creative prowess, and you're very creative, and you work well with creative people, but you need to learn the business. And I said to him, well, how do I do that? So I'll tell you how you do it. First couple weeks here at Marvel, every day go in and ask to see every check that's written and every check that's coming in. That's all you do, is look at the checks. And you understand where the money comes from, and you understand how it's spent, you'll start to understand the business. And I did do that. And it was very helpful because, you know, I'd never had to involve myself in that business part of it. Even at Hanna-Barbera, we had a general manager that did all the business. I would contribute to the deals by telling the lawyers what we needed, but I didn't run the business. I ran the creative and made the shows. So that was good advice. And I say now to people, learn, no matter how creative you are, get an understanding of the business, because then you'll be prepared for the decisions that have to be made, or the decisions that are made that will affect you.
Yeah. Did seeing those checks, did that change anything about
everything?
What, like what?
It first of all, it instantly showed you where the value came from in the company. So you see right away. You see, at Hanna-Barbera, we were very successful with our television shows. We made money off of our series because they were renewed, and we sold the libraries. World Vision was with part of our company. I mean, it was another company owned by the same corporation, and so they sold our shows around the world. We made a lot of money. We didn't have a real successful merchandising arm, not because they weren't good, but because we didn't necessarily have characters that were immediately accessible for merchandising. Like Scooby-Doo's a plush dog. Well, then what? When I got to Marvel and I looked at those checks, all the meaningful money was coming in from merchandising. Mm. Not a lot of money was coming in from the libraries around the world. Or there was money coming in, but I started to understand that in kids programming, you understand that the big money comes, like Power Rangers, from the merchandising. Unless you have a huge series with a long run like Scooby-Doo, you don't have to have merchandising to make it successful. You can make money from distribution. But that's the first thing I saw. And I also saw how much money they spent in certain areas that was a little askew, I felt. So I could see that. I'd say, well, we're spending too much here, but not enough here. And then the checks going out, that's where I saw where we were spending, and the checks coming in, what we're getting. And so it starts to give you a different perspective, so that when you make your decisions for shows, which is why I chose X-Men first as a priority. I felt from a merchandising perspective, not only a story perspective was it very rich, but the merchandising potential was very rich, just because of the cast of characters.
And that word, it bought you time to do
Absolutely.
Ranger. Wow.
Absolutely.
Mm. Okay. What advice would you give an aspiring television executive today?
Wow. Well, no job is too small. That's the most important thing. I am so lucky that I started as a clerk typist in the film department at ABC. It was the bottom rung of the bottom. But starting there and working my way up, I learned a lot. And I often tell people, if they have a choice between the bottom job and a low management job when you first go in, take the bottom job, because you won't learn as much in the management job. So that's one thing. No job is too small, or no job is beneath you. Take it. Get your foot in the door. That's the most important thing. And then the other thing that I tell students all the time is, if you're not curious, you're not going to learn. And if you're not enthusiastic, you won't be noticed. So if you're not really enthusiastic as a person, pretend to be. Try it for a change. It's very infectious. It's basic things like that. Now, remember, I had no education in this business. There are kids working in this business or starting out that their fathers or mothers were successful, so they know a lot more than I knew. They may already have a craft that they can apply, so maybe they can start in editing because they've been editing. The kids edit now in their living room or their bedrooms with their computers. But so that's changed a lot. Kids, and the other thing I tell kids is if you're interested in production, you're interested in making programming, make them. Because you have all the tools today in your computer at home. Make them. Just take whatever money you have and make them, because those become your signature pieces. And through that experience, you'll learn more.
Is there any different or more specific advice for an aspiring television producer?
I would say that the most important thing a television producer can do is understand scripts, writing, appreciate it, and study it, because the best producers do have a gift for the written word. But even if they're not writers themselves, they can recognize good writing and good. It often gets, I'm a big fan of writers because it starts and stops with them. And even in kids programming, writing is so important. All the shows that I've done that were successful were earmarked because they were well written. I was sitting next to Peter Chernin, who was at the time, we were both at Fox, and Peter was president of primetime programming. I don't remember what his title was. I think he was president of programming. And we were sitting backstage getting ready to address our affiliates, and he turned to me and he said, "Do you have as many challenges and problems with scripts and kids programs as I do in primetime?" I said, "Yes. We're always looking for better scripts. It's hard. It's hard to write, especially for kids programming. It's hard." So I guess that's why I admire good scripts so much, is that I know how hard it is to achieve. And some of the best writers I've worked with have been very difficult people, but it's worth it. So, but producers can be talented in any number of ways. There are producers that are really talented as editors. Post-production, they're gifted. They can really make a difference. So I just think that what I would tell producers is know what you're good at and learn what you're not good at. Make an effort.
What are the biggest changes you've seen in children's programming since you started?
Anything goes today. It's sort of the Wild Wild West. I'm not totally pleased with everything that's happening. There's some wonderful shows, imaginative, very imaginative, but there's so much being done. And I'm really troubled by the amount of name-calling and crassness that's now in children's programs. And I recognize it's modern times. But I had worked with people, primarily men, who were as crass as could be in person. They could make very off-color jokes and make fun of each other. And, you know, Tex Avery had one eye because they used to have push-pin fights. And one got in his eye. They were wild. But when it came to what they did, they really felt responsible. They wanted to entertain each other and outdo each other, but there was always a line that they wouldn't cross. And I don't see that so much today. I see some very good programming, and I see some really, I find, troubling programming for kids. But there is so much out there that, you know, there's so many avenues now for kids to get programming that there's so much more that it makes it more challenging.
Where do you think that whole industry is headed? Like, what happens after superhero?
Wow. There's probably going to be some great programming produced that will be a throwback in some ways in the quality of writing being aspirational and inspirational, not just hip and crass. And when that happens, then as everything in our industry, it follows a trend. Maybe more of that will come along. I think that will happen at some point. But it'll be when this generation grows up and then they have kids.
Mm. Do you think that you'll always follow children's programming yourself?
Well, yes, I do. And I enjoy it. And I think there are more challenges than ever. And I think it's harder than ever because there's so much competition. And because anything goes, that makes it challenging because you really have to try to know what's the right thing to do despite the fact that anything goes. I still believe in the art of storytelling, and I believe that most good storytelling is very aspirational. So, yeah, I'll always follow it. I'm interested in family programming too, and I'm hoping someday family programming will be regarded as a legitimate area of programming. It won't just be this other thing that you put on as part of a... You know, we used to have family channels. Now we don't have any family channels. Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
Do you think you'll dip your toe back into those waters?
Don't know. The day is young. I'm not young, but the day is young.
We have a final question we ask everyone.
Okay.
Professionally. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I think I'd like to be remembered the way the audience remembers me, as someone who really provided them with programming that made their day. You know, someone who made a difference in their lives. It isn't what we set out to do, but it's apparently what we did. We did set out to entertain them. And we did set out to try to have little nuggets of valuable information. I don't think we recognized how much power we had to inspire kids. And when I hear this, that I inspired kids and that I made their youth and I made their day and they couldn't wait, that's really fun. And so I'd like to be remembered for what we achieved, and I'd also like to be remembered as not only a good producer, but a really good executive, an effective executive that people enjoyed working with. They didn't dread my phone call. That they respected me because I respected the people I worked with, you know, some of the great talents that I worked with, and I would hope that that's part of my legacy, but you never know. Every once in a while I get a really bad, you know, something on my Facebook from a fan who's really angry with me. Like last week I got someone who said basically that he hoped I would rot in hell because I canceled one of the Spider-Man episodes. Not true. I didn't cancel Spider-Man, I put him on the air. But you can't control social media, can you?
Not yet.
I don't want to be remembered for things like that. I want to be remembered for bringing to television beloved properties that the kids really got a kick out of and that made a difference in their lives. That's what I didn't expect. I knew we were entertaining them, and I thought that sometimes we were educating them, but I didn't know that I was really making a difference in their lives. And every time one of these millennials or Gen Xers say that to me, I'm surprised.
Do you think if you had known at the time, you'd have felt the...
I would have been mortified.
You had that responsibility.
Yeah, I just didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want to do anything that would harm them. I didn't really think we were making a difference in their lives other than entertaining them. But you know, having said that, looking back, I remember those Saturday mornings as my youth, the only place we watched TV, when I'd go to my neighbors up until I was 12 years old when we got a TV. And it was fun. It was a group activity. It was a neighborhood activity. You know, there's only usually 1 or 2 televisions in the whole neighborhood. Long ago.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
My
pleasure. It was such a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you from behalf of all of us who were fans
growing up. You're welcome.
All these shows growing up. We thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. you know, you were talking to me about what I'd like to be remembered for. And really what I want to talk about is people's trust and commitment to each other in our business, because this is kind of a funny story that happened when I was doing Power Rangers. And at the time, there was a lot of controversy around Power Rangers at Fox. I had shown it at the upfronts where our advertisers are, and the advertisers were mortified by the show. And as a matter of fact, 5 minutes before our upfronts, our head of advertising came up to me and asked me if I just wouldn't show the Power Rangers clip. And I said, well, I've got to show the clip because the show's on the air. He says, well, let's pretend it's not. I said, no, I can't. I'm going to show the clip. So I did show the Power Rangers clip, and he was right. The advertisers were mortified. They didn't want to buy in that show. So that started spreading the word throughout the company, throughout Fox, that this thing that Jamie Kellner had allowed Margaret to do, Jamie was now gone from the company. Lucy Salhaney was the chairman of Fox Broadcasting at this point. She was my boss. And Lucy and I had kind of a running little joke, because she always told me how old I was, because I was 2 months older than she was, and she would never let me forget it. And I tell you that because of what happened with Power Rangers. So about a week before we were to premiere the series, I got a call from Lucy saying, look, the affiliates have really, they're up in arms about Power Rangers. They've seen some of your promos. They think it looks terrible. They think it's shoddy. It's violent. They don't want to air it. I said, what? She said, they don't want to air the show. She said, so here's what I suggest you do. I want you to feed it to all the stations. Do a private closed feed. And once the stations see what you've done, maybe they'll feel better. I'm thinking, no, maybe not. But I said, okay, that's what we'll do. So we fed all the shows to the stations, closed circuit, and I went on vacation for 4 days. I went out of town with my family because it was right before premiere and I was exhausted. And I got a telex from Lucy. First a phone call and a message, and then a telex. In those days, that's how we communicated. And it said, Dear Margaret, the show's a disaster. The affiliates are up in arms. I have 10 stations that refuse to air the show when it premieres next week. You need to take it off the air and put something else on. Maybe I'm too old, but I think the show's got to go. So I got this while I was on vacation, this telex, and I'm mortified. And my heart's beating 100 miles a minute, and I think, what to do, what to do? So I circled on the telex, maybe I'm too old, and I wrote, you are, because remember, I'm 2 months older than she is. I said, you are. And I wrote the words that you should never use in any business. Trust me, this is going to work, and if it doesn't, I have a backup series. And I sent it to Lucy. And to her credit, she called me up and said, okay, I'm going to support you. You've got a backup series. I said, uh-huh. I didn't. I didn't tell the truth. I didn't have a backup series, but I figured if she made me cancel, I'd find a series. I'd do something. I'd go out and acquire a series real fast. So Lucy stood by me, but when we premiered the show, 10 stations didn't carry it, and it was still a huge hit. And it took 3 or 4 weeks for all those stations to reluctantly get on board and take the show. And of course, the rest is history. It was very successful. But I guess the point of this is, I always appreciated Lucy supporting me, because she could have just as easily have said, forget it. I told you, it's got to come off. And I would have had to take it off the air. It would have never premiered. But she trusted me, and it was because of that running joke when I said, you are too old, trust me. I think it's the only time in my career I've ever said to someone, trust me. Because usually when someone says that, you immediately don't trust them. So that's my story.
All right, we got it. Thank you so much.